Hey everybody, sorry for that little delay. I'll do a restart. How's everybody doing? Let everyone get in here and then we'll start moving. Terrible. Efrain, what's going on? It's highlight of your day. Austin, let me introduce you to the world of anime. Sir, you got a job on there to watch all that stuff. I don't recommend One Piece though, I'm sorry. Recommend it. I'm currently watching this anime right now. It's a sumo one. I mean, only anime can make sumo interesting and awesome. I don't know, it's nothing else. Okay. Looks like this is 1990s NARS. It's one of my favorite headers, to be honest. I like that. It was a Star Wars poster from Eastern Europe. What the hell is that? How does that represent Star Wars exactly? Marlon, I have streamed on Twitch, but I personally don't like Twitch. I think Facebook Live works better for um, streaming games. I don't like how Twitch deletes videos after 7 days unless you make highlights out of them. I mean, I kind of understand the concept, but Twitch also has a much more limited audience. From my website, I have a much bigger audience on Facebook because that's really the only social media platform I've used for it. I just started to use YouTube for it, like, I don't know, 6, 7 months ago maybe. So it's still really new on there. But I tried Twitch. I just don't get it, honestly. I mean, and like I know how it works. I'm just like I don't know why it's a site. Like, why do we need this? There's too many apps. There's like quadrillion apps out there. Like, how many apps do you need? Seriously. So I have, but I don't really like it. I prefer using Facebook Live for game streams because it saves any video you do. And I already have a big fan base on there, so if I really care, I do it on there. There's too many people streaming games anyway. I don't need to do any of that. For free? Oh, for anime. Austin, have you not heard of 9 anime? Can I say that? Yeah, I think I can. Yeah, this weekend, so this is the last lecture day. Monday you'll have 2 films to watch, and then Wednesday we're just going to watch 2 new films in Zoom privately, both animated, I think. That's what I'm going to show you. So this is it. This is the last one. And then the chapter will be open though next like Monday. All right, looks like we got pretty much everybody in here, so let's get started here. The 1990s, crazy time in Russia and the rest of Eastern Europe. But again, Russia has been our primary focus for this semester since Russia was and is the biggest market for film in Eastern Europe, even today. Artistically speaking, Poland tends to get more of the press right now. Czech Republic, it's kind of lost its way. You know, Jan Svankmajer is really it. Russia still got some names there, but they're kind of like facing a crisis. It's very similar to what you saw in early 80s with films that make money but don't really see much press outside of Russia. And then, artistic films that might get press, but nobody wants to pay to see them. At any rate, 90s, what the heck happens here? Okay, well, I got 3 primary things to talk about for this today. Boris Yeltsin, always hilarious. Dissolution of the Soviet Union. Oh, what a shame. Communism didn't work like a million times over. 3, a new economy and a new war. So what happens after that, right? Well, it's new economy and then more war. Okay, great. Boris Yeltsin. Oh yes, 1931, 2007. So this particular lecture means a lot to me, not because I think it's like the greatest lecture or anything like that, because at this point in my life, so I was of course alive in the 90s, as you probably would guess. At this point in my life, I can remember a lot of this stuff. Stuff from like parts of the 80s. I'm like, I don't remember really what that meant, but I can remember media talking about Yeltsin when I was in um, junior high. I can remember people talking about Yeltsin. So this stuff is still very fresh to me in my memories in comparison to some other things. Um, so Yeltsin was the last sort of Soviet leader because he changes the country almost immediately after that. But I can remember whenever Yeltsin was discussed in the media that this is a time when people started to be like, oh, you know what? We like Russia. So he really did help with that in Russia's image in the world, at least partially. I guess some things he wasn't so good. But I remember lots of Americans were like, oh, this Yeltsin guy's great. Yeah, I like Russia now. There was definitely a time when we were changing our ideas about Russians there. But so what happened here with the Soviet Union? How did this all finally fall apart? Well, we know with the gerontocracy and things that you learned about in last lecture, and then stagnation period before that, and so forth. So this all finally just collapses. So this is Gorbachev era, of course, and glasnost, perestroika, of course, and talked about that last week. So here was the big turning point. It's interesting to me. You always hear people like, who actually brought down the Soviet Union? Some people mention the Pope, and then some people mention this, and well, Reagan did this, and the Berlin Wall, and in actuality, it was something you would never suspect that caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. It wasn't the Pope. It wasn't President Ronald Reagan at that time. You would never even guess what it was I'm about to tell you. So, September 1989, Yeltsin visits the U.S. So in politics, he eventually was made mayor of Moscow, so he was going up the ranks, very similar to other members of the gerontocracy, who got to the upper ranks like Brezhnev. Brezhnev knew Khrushchev, Khrushchev knew Stalin, and back. So getting up the ranks there. In September 1989, he visits the U.S. So as he was visiting the U.S., he decides to make this impromptu visit to this supermarket called Randall's in Clear Lake, Texas. I'm not even sure where Clear Lake is. I don't remember where, in Texas, but there was a supermarket there, which I actually think the chain is still there, called Randall's. And so he decides to stop off there. He's like, let's see what these Americans have, what kind of prosperity you really have. So when he comes in here, he sees a typical American supermarket, as you see it there in this image. So he's walking past various vegetables there. Even today with the quarantine, I mean, at least at Wegmans where I shop, it's pretty similar to what you're seeing there right now, even with quarantine and people stockpiling some stuff. So, all right, so he visits the supermarket. So what was the big deal here? Well, the big deal was that the Soviet Union didn't look like this. All of the problems and the corruption and the bureaucracy and the gerontocracy and all that stuff, it was something you couldn't hide anymore. The communism failed. The end. And so that's an American supermarket, 1989. I'll say more about that. Let's see a Soviet supermarket around this same time. What do they got? This is actual uncut footage, by the way. You thought quarantine was bad. This wasn't even a quarantine. Oh, Sophie, you really want the Randalls? Okay, so it's still there. So I guess you're in Texas. I mean, I don't know where else it is, but... So, because of shortages, lack of focus on consumer goods in the Brezhnev era, these various problems, it just all eventually everything just collapsed. I don't know what the heck that is. That's napkins. So things were in very short supply. I remember it was this big thing for Russians in the 90s and early 2000s, like, to find an orange at the supermarket. Yeah, there it is. So, pretty sad, right? There's that communism for you. Socialism, whoa! Wait a minute. Oh, yeah, it does have some problems, doesn't it? At any rate, so... This is what, I mean, there's 17 minutes of footage here. I could skip through a ton of this, and show you various things, people in line, and the limited food. Got some macaroni. How about this? I don't know what the hell that is, but I do not think I want to eat it. I know we got some buckwheat there for sure. Those weird things there that I don't know what's going on there, man. So extremely limited. Any rate, that's what Yeltsin knew. So he comes to Randall's. He's like, man. At first, no joke, at first he actually thought it was staged, similar to these so-called Potemkin villages back in the Stalinist era where, U.S. dignitaries and people from Europe would come there to check out and see what's the Soviet Union really doing, and they would see these incredible peasant communities that look legit, and they were like, wow, everything's doing good here, and it was all sham. They were fake villages, and actors pretending to be peasants. North Korea does some of this too. There's that, city or whatever there along the 30th with the 30th parallel that is fake, and they claim there's people living there, but it's a total joke. So Yeltsin at first he thought, he's like, this is staged. The Americans did this just so I. Then he was like, then he realized, he's like, wait a minute, they had no idea I was coming here. It was an impromptu visit. He just said, let's go check out this supermarket. I want to see it. And he realized, well, there's no way they could have staged all of this at that time. It was absolutely impossible. So as he's being led around by his translator here, who's on the right there, he's serious. He eventually comes to this aisle that has, as you can see, Jello pudding pops. Jello pudding pops. I don't even think they make them anymore, but there's Jello pudding pops, and you can pudding pops, and you can see just slightly above that right here, it looks like some Nestle Crunch bars or something like that. So Yeltsin sees, he's like, "Hey, what is this?" So his translator had to explain to him that this is frozen pudding chocolate, basically. And he's like, even Gorbachev doesn't have this back in Russia. What the hell is this? So at this point, Yeltsin starts to realize that the Soviet Union, everything that it believed in and claimed is a sham and is falling apart. Pudding pops is what did it. That's what I'm telling you, folks. It wasn't the Pope at the time. It wasn't President Reagan at the time. What really gets Yeltsin thinking communism needs to end and the Soviet Union needs to change into something else, it's not Soviet anymore, is Jello pudding pops. Because they didn't have anything like that. He had never seen this, and he couldn't believe that such a thing existed. He was like, oh my God. Jello pudding pops. The Soviet Union must end now. So it got him thinking. Of course, he saw other things like credit card machine. He's like, what is? My God. And the guy's like, yeah. You put a card in here. And he's like, how do you pay for your food? You put the card in here and it charges it. He's like, what's that mean? They didn't have this stuff. He's like, what is all this? But pudding pops was really the moment. He's like, man, pudding pops. We don't have that stuff. So that got him thinking about what to do. I'll get back to this. So there was one point in his trip whenever he's in the United States where I think he was either going from Miami to Houston or Houston to Miami. It was somewhere in his journey there. And one of his associates claimed later that he was just sort of staring out the window like this. You're like, buddies, hey. What? Oh. And then his response was basically like, what have we done? Like, he couldn't believe it. And no joke, it was really pudding pops that made him start to think this. Like, it was Jello pudding pops. It's pretty much what brought down the Soviet Union. It was like iconic symbols of American capitalism that no one really cares about, and you've probably eaten a million of them in your life at some point or something like it. That was what really got him to think about, this communism thing, maybe not so good. We don't have Jello pudding pops. Anyway, so he was thinking, something needs to happen. It wasn't just that, though. I mean, there was other stuff, but that really, you're laughing. I'm serious about this. Look it up. The whole Yeltsin and Jello pudding pop story is just absolutely hilarious. Yeah, I feel so patriotic for eating a snack pack right now. You should. They don't got this stuff. Your socialism, communism. They don't have Jello pudding pops, man. They don't have Scooter Crunch bars. You kidding me? America. At any rate, so there was other things happening in the Soviet Union as well. There was uprisings in Central Asian republics. One of the big ones happened in Tajikistan in 1990, and then Uzbekistan had some things going on. Turkmenistan had some things going on. Kazakhstan. So there was unrest and instability in Central Asian republics, and that's bad. So there were lots of things piling up here. Denial of disease. I mentioned this last time, actually. AIDS, or speed in Russian. This is see this old propaganda poster about speed. Started to appear in Soviet Union, Russia in particular, in 1987, actually, right around the time it was happening in America, a little bit after that. And Soviet government basically like, this is not a problem. And they just basically denied it exists and didn't do anything about it. And then it spread like wildfire. And then they were like, oh, shit. So, they denied that. And then, with Glasnost, they're like, yeah, actually, we kind of dropped the ball on that one, So AIDS started to appear in 1987, and that had become a huge health concern in Russia. And then eventually it falls apart. So Yeltsin's got to make some big decisions here. So here we have Gorbachev, and he's looking over the broken sickle and hammer there. So Eastern Bloc actually began to dismantle by 1989, and soon the rest of the Soviet Union followed suit. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they drop out early 90s. So it all starts to sink really quickly here. I love this guy. He makes these little videos here, but this video is showing you the dissolution of the Soviet Union here. Let me skip ahead a little bit. I like how they play the anthem over it. Oh, sorry. This is showing you for. Oh, here we go. Now we're in the 90s. Okay, so we're in the 90s here, and you can see that the Baltic states up here have already fallen apart. The other ones here are beginning to collapse and separate. Let's hear that anthem. Bye-bye, Ukraine. Belarus, see you later. All right, so that happened pretty rapidly there. 1991 in June specifically was the first presidential election in Russian history. And now the communist hardliners were trying to retain their power. So, for example, this propaganda post on the list is "За Союз" for the Union, meaning Soviet Union. And then on the right there, it's showing you, you could vote for that type of Russia on the left with the fence, right, as a reminder of the Gulag. Or we can break those chains and break that fencing and become an open modern country on the right there. Like, when you not yet die, take your pick. So first presidential election, and Yeltsin gets 59% of the vote, actually. Now the hardliners were like, this ain't going down. So they tried to instigate a coup, and they got the military involved, and they drove tanks into Moscow, August 1991. In defiance of the coup, this is one of the most famous moments for Yeltsin. I can remember this one, too. The brief memories of this in my mind. August 1991, Yeltsin defies the coup. He and his associates and followers get in front of these tanks, and then the military, who at this point was pretty much given up in Soviet Union, they're like, screw it. And Yeltsin gets up on the top of one of the tanks, and he gives this big speech saying, that he is the rightful ruler now of what is no longer the Soviet Union. Now Russia is going to become this entity that we call Commonwealth of Independent States. So you can see the guy on the right here with the glasses is raising the original Russian flag. So this is it. And there he is in the front of the Soviet official building in the back down there. So this tank speech is one of the most famous moments from Yeltsin's political reign. But let's see some of this in original AP footage, actually. It's Gorbachev there. So he stepped down. A little further ahead here. Okay. Yeah, here we go. So it says Moscow there. Moskva. Turn the volume a bit. I'm going to skip past this because they don't give you subtitles here. Let's just see how many people arrive for this. Okay, here we go. Here's the coup they're attempting. Yeah, average citizens had enough. They're like, no, you're done. This was a huge moment. I can remember this. Tearing down these old Soviet sculptures. Forgive me, it says right there in graffiti. Karl Marx statue. See different country flags there from young people that had died trying to fight for freedom. And you get the point. So that was a big deal when this down. Okay, so here's our Yeltsin question here. I'll make sure I have a little more time here in case anyone is behind. All right, so you just gotta put this in order here. All right, so Yeltsin, he did represent hope for Russia, former Soviet Union. Lots of people, lots of American politicians liked him. Lots of Americans liked him. Thought it was a new image for Russia. But his reforms were a pretty quick disaster, actually. I'll be getting to that next. So for this question, you just have to organize, what happened first, earliest to latest. We've done some of these before, just to check your knowledge there. So in the order given here, AIDS appears in Russia, Boris Yeltsin gives his tank speech, Yeltsin visits America, and then first free election is held in Russia. That's going to be too hard for you to figure out which one came first. It's one of his presidential posters from the era. The president should always win. What? Andrew, if you meant people in the tanks, they just backed off. Yeah, this one shouldn't be too bad there. Not tricky, I don't think. I think I made this one pretty manageable. See, my delay here is, yeah, it's only about 10-second delay, so that should have been enough extra time for you. Again, like usual, anyone needs fixes or anything, just let me know. Coachella sucks this year, does it? They can't hold it, right? I don't. There's already talk of going digital in the fall now. I'm like, oh man. Okay, looks like pretty much everyone's got it. All right, let's let it finish off here. So there's you might still be a little bit delayed. A few of you left. Poor Yeltsin. So hopeful at first. Everyone's like, wow, great. I like this guy. It's not that they hated him. They were like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Okay. So AIDS was first. That was before Yeltsin even visited America. America's 89, so 87, 89. First three elections were before the tank speech because the coup was after he wins, and the old Soviet hardliners are like, no. Okay, so as I said, Yeltsin was looked at as an image of hope to Russians, to Americans. So in this main header here, for example, those of you who might know a little bit about Russian culture, or even some of the things we talked about this semester, whenever this new economy begins here, what they did here, this artist, I don't know who did this actually, is we have Yeltsin, and it says Boris the Conqueror at the top there, and he is spearing the dragon or snake, as you see in the traditional image of Moscow, which is St. George and the Dragon. So they're likening him to this figure from Orthodoxy, and it's painted in a way that's like an icon, like an Orthodox icon. You have like the hand of God or Christ up there, sort of blessing him. So Russia's really hopeful about this guy. They were like, this is it. Now everything's going to be good. We have a good direction here. Soviet Union is over. Thank God. Now we're going to do it. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Shock therapy economics. All right, so this is what Yeltsin introduces. So in his opinion, the economy needed a total overhaul, and he referred to this as shock therapy. It needed to be shocked, in effect. Yeah, so Victor's saying here, Gorbachev didn't step down. He was president of USSR and Yeltsin, but Yeltsin was president of Russia, and he lost power. But I mean, he had to, agree to it, right? That's what I meant. At any rate, so this political cartoon here is summarizing exactly what was about to happen. So we have Russia symbolized here with this babushka, this grandmother with the scarf on her head, and he's jumping into the river, which says market economy. And he yells, "Yeltsin, I can't swim." He says, "Swim, heck, the fall will probably kill us." Funny, but yeah, it's essentially what happens. Now, one of the problems with Yeltsin that the American media latched onto this really quickly is that he had a bit of a drinking problem. So the guy would get drunk quite a bit. And one of the most famous instances of that was whenever he came to talk politics with then President Bill Clinton. And I have the video here. This is the entirety of the footage. What most Americans saw was a brief moment I'm going to show you here at 5 minutes and 5 seconds. Let me just show you. And then the translator here is talking to. 1 second. Get through this. Let's see. Okay, here we go. I'm pretty sure there's somebody speaking. 1 second.
Даже в сегодняшних всех газетах, опираясь на вчерашнее выступление в Организации Объединенных Наций, вы пререкли, что наша встреча сегодня, она провалится.
And this is all.
Yeah, so the translator will come after him. But if you pay attention to Yeltsin, right, especially if you can understand Russian, you can probably pick up his voice. He's kind of slurring a bit. Guy's a bit drunk here during the speech, and Clinton knows it. He's like, "Oh, please, please, don't do something to embarrass yourself." Okay, so there's the moment that most of the press was really latching onto here.
All due to you, because coming from my statement yesterday in the United Nations, and if you looked at the press reports, one could see that what you were writing was that today's meeting with President Bill Clinton was going to be a disaster.
Так вот, не первый раз я вам говорю, что вы провалились.
Well, now for the first time I can tell you that you're a disaster.
Be sure you get the right attribution there.
Я надеюсь, что вы правильно все это поняли.
So there were a couple of moments just like this, right around this timestamp, that is what most Americans saw. So it was great, you know. Clinton, then President of the United States, was laughing with the then president of Russia, and everyone thought this was great. They're like, hey, they're laughing now, you know, everything. But the issue here is that Yeltsin was actually drunk, and Clinton was trying to save him from embarrassing himself by doing something silly, because he had done this in the press already. So if you actually watch the whole thing, you will see at the end here, so this is going on like 26, 28 minutes, Yeltsin like refuses to get down from talking, and Clinton keeps trying to like get him to go away.
Что вы недооцениваете президентов
You are
двух
underestimating the
таких
president
великих держав.
of two such great powers.
Может быть, вам что-то и не приходило в голову, как решить эту проблему.
Maybe,
А нам пришло.
maybe something didn't quite reach you. Maybe you can't quite figure out how we can solve it.
See how he tries to, he starts to pull him off. He's
But
like,
it came
yep,
to us, it
hilarious.
reached us.
Let's get off of here now, please, before you make a fool of yourself. He eventually gets him off. So he like kept going. At any rate, so the media really latched onto the fact that there was this sort of, you know, there seemed to be now peace that was developing here and friendship and stuff like that. That's why they really focused on the laughing moments. But okay, so here's what happens here. So Yeltsin introduces what's essentially free market economics. It's similar to what the Soviets did in the NEP era back in the 1920s, except state control is being removed, right? There was still state control of certain things in NEP. And so privatization, of course, is part of this, and this is going to lead to what is referred to as usually as the oligarchy, right? This is the rule by the rich. So what happens is that Russia and Russians, more specifically, weren't used to this system, and they weren't ready for how it worked, especially people that were older. So when the system starts to collapse, younger people, people in crime organizations, and old Soviet hardliners who understood the way that things worked a little better and were able to exploit the situation, they develop into what was this sort of conglomerate of dirty money, youth, and old Soviet gerontocracy that became the oligarchy that controlled essentially half of the Russian economy by the time you get to the middle of the 1990s. So it's basically a total collapse because they were not ready for this. I could skip this. You can find these videos online of Yeltsin and his various drunken moments if you're curious. There's tons of them. So the shift to, as I have here, the shift to a free market system destabilized Russia, led to massive inflation, devaluation of the ruble. Similar to Germany after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Similar to America, Great Depression right after late 1920s, right, early 1930s. Especially. So this is showing you the decline in the Russian GDP. So 1989, of course, so still on the Gorbachev, and then dropping down. So Yeltsin right to 1991, right? And then now notice he comes next, Vladimir Putin, right? Now, you know, avoiding whatever's going on there currently. But from 1999, when Putin gets in there, you can see it goes. So like him or not, lots of Russians support Putin. I mean, the majority do. He's had I think in history, he has the longest and most consistent ratings of any world leader. Russians love that guy. And one of the reasons why is he did economically pull them out of where they were. You could see it in the little graph here. It's a simple graph, but anyway. So Russia was destabilized under this shock therapy system. It just wasn't ready for this quick of a change, and it just collapsed. Income was moved to the West by lots of these people that figured out the system for more lucrative dealings, as they have here. And this led to a class referred to as this whole oligarchy thing. It led to this class that's referred to as the New Russians, Novaya Ruskia. Lots of them were younger. Some of them were involved in organized crime. And economic power, as I have here, fell into the hands of a few who controlled half the economy. So this image of the so-called New Russians, they usually look like this. It's kind of like this reinvention of the Nepman image or Nepman image from the 1920s. Someone who learned how to exploit this system, made a lot of money off of it, and did very well. And they were known for wearing flamboyant, flashy clothing and all these jewelry and chains and having fancy cars and cell phones. And it's a very antiquated cell phone there, but cell phones and oh man, and they really learn how to work the system. So what did average Russians do? Well, they had to fight for themselves many times. I have lots of stories about this. Russia's industrial power collapsed. Living standards collapsed. Here's a political cartoon from the United States. Got the sanatorium there, which just means a place to rest. Doesn't mean insane asylum in original Russian context. Only 2 empty vodka bottles. Yeltsin must be really sick. One of those jokes. Food lines, of course, because already the disparities that were there got even worse. Food line there. This is a Russian children's store at that time. Photographs just in black and white. The photographer just chose this. There was nothing to buy. Poverty increased. And lots of cases, young girls actually went into prostitution because they couldn't make any money. They were kicked out of their homes sometimes. And in certain cases of this, I remember I knew somebody who, there was this whole thing that started to happen in Russia at that time, these mail order brides. You maybe have heard of this. Maybe you've heard jokes or something about Russian mail order brides. It was like a thing in the 90s because lots of girls wanted to get the hell out of there. And I knew a guy who got involved in one of those Russian dating agencies because he wanted to meet a Russian girl and get married to her. He was older too, I think. At that time, I remember I was like early 20s and this guy was like mid 40s. So he found this Russian girl. He was really excited to meet her. He found on some Russian dating site or something like that. And he went there to meet her. And then, they had sex and stuff like that. And then she started to get really cold towards him. And he had paid lots of money to get there and stuff like that. And then he found out that it was just a scam that her family was running, apparently willingly with her consent, to use her to make money for the family by bringing in foreign guys from America especially and pretending that she wanted to marry them, messing around with them enough that they paid for things and then giving the money to her family. That's how that family was surviving, was they were essentially prostituting their daughter through this front of Russian mail order brides, what they were doing. So that was just one example of this. Another example of this, one of the biggest ones is lots of Russians started to get involved in piracy and bootlegging. There was already piracy and bootlegging going on in 70s and 80s. For example, Star Wars first makes it to Russia via illegal VHS bootlegs that started to make their way in there in the 1980s. So there was already a tradition of this, but this explodes in the 1990s. So my question is very simple, and I made it anonymous. So Russia piracy has been a huge issue, but as I mentioned, it was there before. Just curious, have you ever watched a pirated film in any form? Download, illegal DVDs. Another form of this too that's seen as this gray area, websites like Putlocker, where technically it's not illegal for you to watch the movie, provided you don't download it. It's illegal for the site to run those streams, but it's not illegal for you to stream it. It's illegal for them, but it's not legal for you unless you actually download it, or if you were to show it in front of a large audience or something like that. So under Full Sail, Russian online piracy, 2017, $85 million online piracy market. 21% increase since the guess is just from this time. Number of pirated copies of movies, you can see it increased exponentially, 2016, 2018. More than 300,000 files. So it's just giving you some Russian statistics from 2017, but it was definitely a big thing there. Bootlegging and piracy was a way that lots of average Russians were just making money. CDs especially, cassettes, because they still were using cassette players as something that they could afford to buy to listen to music in the early 2000s even. So piracy was a big thing there, and one of the ways people were making money. So they were getting involved in lots of illegal activity because the market was basically just left on its own and just and then you have this oligarchy that comes in control, and they basically control half of the economy. So the average person has to fend for themselves. Okay, let's see. So answers here for have you ever watched a pirated film in any form is yes, no, or I will neither affirm nor deny it. I'll let it finish off here a little bit more time, but I got a couple stories about this because the last time I lived in Russia was a while ago. It was 2003, just when things were picking up under Putin, and Yeltsin was done and passed on the torch in 1999. So I was there early 2000s, and I saw some of this. Okay, so I see large chunky. We're like, yeah, all right, I've been there. C, probably yes, but you're like, I will not tell you. Any rate, so it's a very common thing. It's a problem that Hollywood has today with illegal streams. Market is very digitally based now, so it's certain things are difficult to navigate. But this is something I saw in Russia when I was there last. Let me go. Whoops, no, I want to go this way. So it was common to go to Russian computer stores and you'd see these walls of programs. At this time, this is funny. Windows 2000, oh man, it's old. Windows 2000, we've got Monsters Incorporated, Ice Age Part 1, Shrek video game there. I can't read. Some of these other ones are hard to see what they are. Windows Server 2000. It's all illegal. None of that's legit. And it was funny, when I was there last in 2003, I remember at the time, so by that point you had big companies like Universal that were moving in stores and stuff like that, and it was beginning to change a little bit, but it was still like a joke. At the time, I still listened to this band it's called Cannibal Corpse, and they still exist, death metal band. And so at the time that I was in Russia, that particular 1 month, they released their new album, and I was like, oh, cool. I wonder if they have in the store. So I went to the big, Universal music store, which had CDs and stuff there, and people still bought CDs. And it was there for, with the equivalent of what you would pay for it in America, about $18. I was like, oh, man. Then you had these outside kiosks being run by random people. Sometimes it's an old lady. Sometimes it's some young metalhead dude or some girl like you see in the picture here who probably doesn't listen to any of the music but doesn't care. She found a way to make money. And there was one time I was going through the subway and there was this metalhead there, long hair and sunglasses, and he was selling a bunch of CDs. And I was like, you have the new Cannibal Corpse. And he's like, and of course in Russian, he's like, come back tomorrow. Anytime you heard a Russian say that in this era, you knew exactly what that meant. I have a tomato. That meant I have to go make it for you illegally, and then you can buy it tomorrow. Sure enough, I came to the subway. Same guy was there. He saw me. He's like, "Idu сюда. Come on over here." He's like, what? There it is. Skin new Cannibal Corpse. And they look totally legit. It wasn't like a CDR. Like it wasn't like clearly burned on his computer. They clearly had some glass press CD factory hidden somewhere in the alley there. And he went to it and they found high quality, high res images from that album. And they downloaded those all. And they made legit inserts and legit CD with the painted image on it. Like the whole thing was 100% legit looking, but totally illegal. So I was like, well, how much? And he basically the equivalent of what I paid was like $1. I'm like, oh, give me that. And I started going around the other kiosks. I'm like, yeah, you guys have carcass? Come back tomorrow. One store I went to was like these two old guys, and it was like within their house, like basically in their living room, they changed it into a CD store. And I went there, I'm like, do you have one Cradle of Filth album? I forget, it was like one of their first ones. It was really rare and hard to find. And they were like, come back tomorrow. I'm like, okay. So I came back, they're like, there it is. It's very rare. I'm like, I mean, it is, because technically this is the only one ever made since you just made it yesterday. But this is what happened. Video games, everything. Video games were especially funny because the majority of Russians had no home video games whatsoever. There were Soviet arcades that actually existed. This is just illustrating this era. But they were so primitive in comparison to what American arcades were like in the 80s and 70s. So most Russians had no exposure to video games. So they suddenly get this huge influx of stuff. Most of it was coming out of Hong Kong and Taiwan at that time. It was pirated games. And so the name that they associated with video games was Dendy. And they had this ridiculous elephant character that was the mascot for this. And there was no control over this. There was like, this calls itself Dendy, but it's just the idea. It's like the concept of Dendy. There were these various systems they released. And you can see, if you know your video games, it's Sega Genesis. And they illegally made that too. So even in 2003, I went to one of these stores. It was just two dudes running it out of some, dilapidated old whatever building in St. Petersburg. And I went down and saw a scene similar to this. And I'm like, what games you got? You got Super Mario Brothers? They're like, we have Super Mario Brothers. I figured what he says, something like 1 through 38. I was like, there's 38 of those? they were just pirated games, and they bootlegged them, and they changed the sprites to look like Mario. They're like, yeah, it's actually Mega Man, but you put Mario in it. Okay, we have all 38 Marios. So like, wow, I didn't know there was that many. So it's hilarious that the whole market was like this bizarre crime syndicate underground pirate market. It was so strange, and I was there for like the heyday of all this, so I saw it. But eventually, this instability was too clear to everybody. So there was a constitutional crisis in September and October of 1993, and it almost all fell apart. Let's see here. On my timing here, I got to move ahead here a little bit, so you'll read about that in your book some more. But one of the big things too that Yeltsin made was a big mistake was the first Chechen War in 1994 to 1996. So what happened was after this instability begins to spread throughout former Soviet Union, one of the areas that was a big problem for Russia even before Soviet Union was Chechnya. Ethnic tensions between Russians and Chechens stretches back to 19th century and prior. It's something that in the American context we really have no understanding of. Like we don't have an understanding of ethnic conflict that goes back that far, on American soil, really is what I mean. So what happened was this instability causes ethnic attacks. So murders of ethnic Russians by Chechens, and so Russians were upset. They're like, we got to do something about this. So Yeltsin decides to move ahead with the First Chechen War. And the Soviet military was still quite strong because it retained lots of the former Soviet infrastructure and stuff. So there were some remnants of that they could use, but they were demoralized. And further, the Chechens were pretty much a genius with guerrilla war tactics, so it was a huge disaster for Russia. Now, when Putin comes back and starts the Second Chechen War, he's going to crush this. He's going to be like, okay. He's going to crush this so bad that he has one of the streets in Chechnya renamed Putin Street, just to show that he smacked down this fast. But under Yeltsin, it was a total disaster. So Yeltsin eventually is like, I'm done. December 31st, 1999, he holds off the reins to then pretty unknown politician Vladimir Putin, right? So Putin, at this time, Prime Minister of Russia, a former KGB agent, most people didn't know much about him. He wasn't like a big figure. In fact, most people were like, oh, this won't last long. This is like the gerontocracy or back in the provisional government, 1917 or something. Like, this is going to last but a week. And he's still in there. So clearly he knew what he was doing, but nobody realized that at first. So December 1999, Putin takes over, and then we know where that goes from there. Now, if there's one other thing I have to mention in Eastern Europe outside of Russia, you got to mention this. It is one of the most brutal conflicts in history. Most of the output you see from former countries of Yugoslavia after 1991 is really focused on this. And most of the films actually being made in Eastern Europe were in former Yugoslavia because of this, documentaries and stuff, where lots of this output was coming from, the Yugoslav wars. 1991 to 2001, it's incredibly complex. I simplify it, in a good enough way in the book for you, but what you need to understand here is the dream of Yugoslavia was not going to last forever. So Yugoslavia, right after World War I, it was this big dream to unite all of the Southern Slavic people into one country. The problem you had there is the diversity there was difficult to control under one entity, really. Why? Well, dominant ethnicity in Yugoslavia was Serbians, similar to Great Russians in Russia. So you got Serbians down there, but you also had Croatians who speak a language that's essentially identical with Serbian, but uses a different alphabet. So Serbo-Croatian is what the language is technically called. Croatians sometimes don't like to hear, even today, that their language is similar to Serbian. If you're like, that's the same as Serbian, right? They'll be like, hey, no. Or if you said to a Serb, if you were like, hey, your language is pretty much similar to Croatian, right? They'd be like, what are you talking about? They'll still get potentially angry about that, even though technically it is the same language, but Serbian uses Cyrillic because it's Orthodox. Croatian uses Latin because it's primarily Catholic. So you got Croatian, you got Serbian. There are some differences there. You got Bosnian, Macedonian, Slovenian, which is kind of its own little weird thing. And then you have pockets of other ethnicities that were in Yugoslavia, especially Albanians, ethnic Albanians, who by the early 1990s were looking for their own state within Yugoslavia. It was a disaster. This was one of the worst wars in history. To date, this is one of the most brutal wars ever fought, one of the worst genocides ever the humanity has ever performed. This is just an image of some of the dead. But when this all goes down, I remember it because I was in seventh grade or so at this time. I mean, we had Americans are like, what the hell is going on over there? They're killing people over their ethnic identity. I mean, it was brutal, some of the stuff that happened. But ethnic Albanians, these pockets of people that were not Slavic and living in that region in one of their own state that wasn't Albania, this was leading to lots of issues. Herzegovinians, I mean, it was too complex and it just all falls apart. Right? So Croatia wants to back out, and Serbia, which is the ruling ethnicity in that region, well, they wanted to retain their power, right, and all that control of the region. They're like, no. So they start some fighting, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse, and lasts roughly 10 years. So this is just showing you some of the what was going on in the war here. This is some documentary footage of the Bosnian War was part of it. This is all under the blanket of the Yugoslavian War. So Slobodan Milosevic was the president of Serbia at this time, and he was eventually found guilty of various war crimes because of what happened to genocide of Bosnians. So at any rate, Bosnian War was part of it. Let's see. Because of our time here.
Serbs hit back.
Please.
Their gunmen erected armed barricades all over the Bosnian capital.
Zahtjevi srpskog stanovništva iz Sarajeva pod 1 da se bezuslovno obustave sve aktivnosti od strane predsjedništva.
So Bosnia won an international recognition. The Serbians didn't want that, right? So they just started to wipe people out. I mean, it was like random murders and rapes in the streets, whole families slaughtered. It was horrifying. This BBC News brief documentary here is about one of these locations. It was called the Rape Hospital. Because we have we don't have enough time here, I'm going to make sure we get our film stuff out of the way. I mean, it's pretty disturbing anyways. I don't know if you want to be disturbed right now with quarantine and stuff. So if you're curious, you can look that stuff up. You're going to learn a little bit more in your book. But let's get now to how this new war comes out in film. What's going to happen here? Well, if you remember when we were going over in the 1980s, so Klimov and his associates are taking control of the Russian Soviet industry by 1986. And basically what they want to do is they want to free things up, and they want film to be a teaching tool. Right? They think it's going to fix Soviet society. So, he releases Come and See and various other films, and other people like him were doing that. So other directors and actors and stuff who were part of this sort of trashier cinema that made money domestically but not internationally were being pushed away, and this causes a progressive breakdown of the system. So based on what you know about the previous decade, what do you think film in Eastern Europe is going to be like in the 1990s? So this is just a word bubble. One here, just add a little more time here. You just got to write in one word that comes to mind. We've done this before. What you think the 1990s were like for film in former Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc. As I mentioned with Yugoslavia, that output in that country is the biggest at this time. It's primarily documentaries about Yugoslav wars. So ignoring that, they made other films, but. And this image, for the way, is from the film Come and See, which I bet probably a few of you will actually pick for your final paper. Warning you, it's a brutal film. But that's the 80s. Ilham Klimov there. What do you think 90s films are going to be like in Russia, former Soviet Union? I actually, sorry, that question. I had to reload the questions here. Piracy is not a victimless crime. Oh, no points for that question. Okay, I just had to go through and add them. I may have accidentally removed that. He went to Russia for her. I didn't go to Russia for that girl. That's just some picture I found. I actually don't have the CD. It wasn't that good of an album. I was bummed out. I eventually sold it later as a rare Russian version. On eBay or something, I don't remember. I didn't keep that one. I was pretty bummed out. I'm like, yeah, Cannibal Corpse is done. I don't listen to this anymore. I do have a few CDs that I did buy there, though. I still have my Russian version of a Carcass album, as well as a band called The Residents and an album called Hell. It's really good. I found that one there. I was like, whoa, The Residents. You guys are really... I didn't have to ask for that one. It was there in one kiosk, right there in the window. $1. Okay, let's see. Looks like... Oh, okay, pretty much everyone's answered here. I'll let this finish off here. It's just a very simple participation one. So yeah, Kaylee, I'll have to check and make sure that I add points in. I can go through and add points. It's very easy to do afterwards, but I may have accidentally had that set to 0. All right, let's see some responses we got here. What are 90s films going to be like in this very strange era? Pudding Pops, man. Experimental, okay. War, creepy. Drunkenness, poverty, progressive, weird. It's probably graphic, yeah. The censorship system totally falls apart. There is no censorship by 1989, so thus no craps are given about what's coming out. This leads to a number of problems in this industry. So this is going to summarize it for you here. So elitist directors found they can make more money in the foreign market, especially film festivals like Cannes or Venice or Berlin film festivals, the 3 big ones. So directors like Klimov and people like that were like, my films aren't making money domestically, so that's removing that money from that industry and putting it all forward, right? And since Goskino doesn't control it anymore, here's what they do. Goskino lacking sufficient domestic films, they began to focus on importing B-action films and Euro porn to survive, right? So you get this really trashy market that develops. As a result of independent production increased, rapidly, as I have here. A decade average of 150 films in the 1980s. There's 375 films in just the year 1991. That's an amazing number of films. 150 in all the 1980s in comparison to 375 in just 1991. It shows you how independent... Oh, missing an eye there. I gotta fix that slide. That shows you how quickly these changes went through, but it was dirty. And I mean, the filth was so visible. Here's another example of that. So again, when I was in Russia, I think it was the first or second time I was there, but we'll just say it was probably 2003. I don't remember for sure. But so you go around to the kiosks to buy newspapers and comic books and stuff back then when people still bought hard copy newspapers regularly. And I remember there's this one stand I went to, and I was really excited that on another stand I had seen that they had Tom and Jerry in Russian comic book for sale. I was like, oh, cool. I want to buy Tom and Jerry and read an American comic in Russian. That's cool. And they also had the Mickey Mouse and some other things. I was like, that's cool. That's neat to bring home, a Russian version of a typical American comic book. So this one, yeah, I'll give you some anime, Austin, at the end of this. So this one kiosk I went to buy Tom and Jerry issue that I was out of my collection when I was in Russia. I was like, man, I need this issue from March or whatever it was. And so I found that this one kiosk had one copy left. And I went there, and the comic book's right there. And there's a kid looking at the comic. He's like staring there looking at it. And no joke, right next to the comic, to the left of it, was hardcore porn mags. And I mean, like, the cover wasn't blacked out or anything. Like, it wasn't in some special little black bag, it said adults only. Like, I mean, we're talking like genital plumbing shots, boom, in your face right there. And this, like, 8-year-old kid is like, he looks at that and he's like, can I have a comic book? Like, he's used to seeing it. He's used to seeing that right there. Means nothing to him. Parents are standing there. They aren't like, oh God, what are you looking at? They're just like, yep, that's Russia right now. Yeah. I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, it was graphic. It was extremely graphic image, just right there. For this kid and other kids' faces and mine, I was like, man, and no warning either. This is what happened to their industry. It became like this filthy market. This was filthy. Now, one of the most notorious films that comes out of this, which I have a clip from here, is called The Green Elephant. With no censorship, less foreign interest, this reduced quality, it reduced domestic revenue, industry just collapses. So to make money, lots of these domestic producers who aren't getting any foreign input, they're like, well, people are liking, like, they want more violence and stuff now because they basically had been protected from this stuff by Soviet policy for a while. No one really had seen stuff like this. So films get increasingly violent and sexual at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out of here. And the quality was really bad too. They were losing their ability to make good films because their equipment was old, their film stock was old, and there's this graininess and this archaic look to all these films. Like, you watch some of these Russian films, for example, some of which are really good and clearly like indie from the 90s. Like, the quality of the film stock feels like it was from the 1970s. Like, you almost feel like you're watching some film from 1970s America that's like outdated. You can just feel it, like that just everything fell apart when you see some of these films. And the film viewing audience as well, that all started to fall apart. You had tons of these abandoned film theaters. This is the Kinoteatr Odessa, or the Odessa Film Theater, closed up. Some of these were repurposed and changed into community organizations and things like that. I got this from a Russian comedy film in this era about making films. One of the things that Russian directors said at this time is they said, sometimes we didn't know when we were making these films, we'd be running out of money, and suddenly some shady looking guy with sunglasses and a briefcase full of money would walk in and be like, here, I like this movie, finish it. We wouldn't ask any questions. We'd be like, okay, we don't know where that money came from, probably some really bad stuff, but we need to finish our film and we need to make money too. So, okay. So the image here is what this film's making a joke about. In some scenes, there's this old guy that walks around. It says savior of Russia on that briefcase there. And they just have a briefcase full of money. And in fact, for a while there, probably until about 2000, using American dollars as currency instead of the Russian ruble was common, right? If you were on the street and if you were like, how much rubles would that be? They'd be like, no, I'm selling this in dollars. And you'd be like, what? Because the dollar was more stable, so they started to use foreign money to buy and sell things. So in some of these jokes, you'll see that the guy actually has a briefcase full of American dollars and not Russian rubles. So this is the reality of this filmmaking era, and people, it's serious. They would say that some guy would just come, totally shady mafia-looking guy or something. He'd be like, I want you to finish the movie. Okay, and they would just open a briefcase of money and be like, there, do it. Okay, for no particular reason. This random guys and people walking around with money. Now, in trying to restabilize things here, what used to be Goskino eventually becomes what we call Roskomkino, Russian Committee of Film, which lasts from 1991 until 1996, when it becomes Roskino, which is still the dominant company in Russia, 1996 to present. Originally, it was Sovkino, though, back in 1924. So this is the company that still controls Russian film worldwide even today. And you had this changing industry too. So the industry began to collapse, so then foreign companies started to get involved. The big moment there was in Moscow in 1997 when the opening of this theater called Kinomir, which means essentially World of Film, otherwise known as Kodak Kinomir, because Kodak is the one that opened this. And this is, it's a while ago, but you can see they have the Superman movie from that time that was showing here. So, and they're primarily using foreign films. So this is similar to what happened in the 1920s, where to survive, people were realizing that foreign films make more money and they're more exciting and the quality's better. We're just going to start showing those, right? And this is what's leading more of this industry collapse to happen, because domestic directors are trying to find ways to compete with foreign films, but they don't have the quality, they don't have the money, and they don't have the technology to do it. So they have to rely on over-the-top sex and violence and people literally eating human feces to make a movie shocking enough that someone's going to want to pay to see it. It's no joke. Watch The Green Elephant, you'll be like, oh my god, it's like the most disgusting movie ever made. Now, what are some of the countries and what do they have in this area? All right, so Hungary. If there's one name associated with modern Hungarian filmmaking, it is Béla Tarr. Oh my god, this guy. His movies are exceptionally long. His most legendary, probably the greatest film he ever did. His film, and then they're excellent to watch if you can make it. Satan's Tango in 1994. I was debating giving you this for next week to watch, but I would have had to assign it about 3 months ago because it's like 8 hours long. I'm not joking. It's like 8 hours long, and this film is about the degradation and collapse of Hungarian communism and what it did to the people in the landscape. It is one of the most disturbing things you could ever watch, and one of the things that makes it disturbing is lots of the shots are very long and extended and very uncomfortable. So let's see, and sometimes there's just sound, kind of like Tarkovsky. Like there won't be any talking, just the sound of garbage blowing around like in this scene here. And this goes on for a uncomfortable amount of time. Hey look, it summarizes communism for you right there. Garbage blowing on the empty streets. Already an American viewer is like waiting for a cut here to another scene. That keeps going on for a while. One of the other scenes is this young girl who, to gain some control of her life, she actually kills her own cat. And then after this, you see her wandering around with the cat for like all these moments of silence before she finally kills herself. Like, this is the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. Mainly because the shots last so damn long. You're going to pick this film just to take it to 9 out. Go for it. Take it. Let's get a little further here. This scene is just... So she walks with the dead cat for a while, and he has all these separate tracking shots like this. And you're just like, man, Hungarian communism sucked. Glad I didn't grow up in that. It's very uncomfortable, right? Already you're like, oh man, like, as a typical viewer, you're probably waiting for a cut to something else, but he just keeps going with this. Now imagine 8 hours of that. The whole film is filmed like this. Imagine that. Yeah, let's see. Go for it, Tim. I want to see if you can do it. Do you have the guts to make it through Satan Tango? Russia. Now Russia's got some cool things coming out here. It has some films that are quite famous actually. Taxi Blues is a good one. The film is about this taxi driver who's really, he hates glasnost and perestroika, and he's really about old Soviet Russia. And eventually he gives a ride to the saxophonist who doesn't have money to pay him, so he takes that guy's saxophone hostage and then gets involved in all this sort of underground crime and drug uses and prostitution. Like, it's a good image of this era. This is before it really becomes like degraded and filthy though. Like it's filthy, but this movie you probably would still enjoy for what it has to say about Russian politics and stuff at that time. But one of the most famous ones, which sadly I still don't know of an English translation of this. If you understand Russian, I highly recommend this one. Sideburns, 1990. It's a comedy. If you like a film, A Clockwork Orange, if you can imagine making that into a dark comedy about the downfall of the Soviet Union and Russian national identity, it probably would be something like this. The basic plot of it is this group of young people create this basically secret society slash cult slash political revolution, all focused around the famous Russian poet Alexander Pushkin, and they call themselves the Pushkinists. And so they dress like Pushkin, as you can see here, and they grow sideburns like Pushkin, which is why it's called Sideburns. And they're trying to enforce the glory of Pushkin onto the Russian populace through force. So they encounter metalheads and weightlifters and stuff throughout this film, and they fight them. It's a really weird movie. It's hilarious though, and this is a theme you see through most of these Russian films coming out in this era, is this idea about what it does it mean to be Russian? What is Russian identity? What are we now? What were we? What will we be? That's what lots of these films are about. And so Pushkin is a national icon and essentially the most famous Russian writer in history, is part of what they're talking about here. Like, and then these people, the Pushkinists, are using Pushkin to bring back Russia to its glory days. So they make the girls wear Pushkin underwear, and they walk around with these canes like Pushkin and beat people with them. It's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. Which sadly, I can't believe it doesn't have an English translation yet. Probably one of the reasons for that is there's lots of cultural references that you might not get unless you knew enough about Russia. But it's a hilarious movie. Let's see here. Okay, let's watch the scene here where they're going to take on these dudes that like weightlifting. Now, these guys are supposed to represent this movement from Russia of young men who didn't like westernization of Russia, and they were trying to bring back Soviet glory days. And one of the ways they did that is weightlifting a lot. So that was like they were walking around like with tight shirts on, and they were trying to like enforce Soviet power and force out Western ideas. So in this scene here, some of the Pushkinists are going to take on these guys, and it has subtitles here. Hold on a second. You're working out in the basement there in some dilapidated building.
Привет, господа мордастые.
The translation's kind of, hey, meatheads, what are you doing down here, is what he's saying there. Let's get to the fighting. Okay, so the head of the Pushkinists is going to come out here and show them what Pushkin's all about. He's telling him to pick up some weapons. He's like, oh, this is a great dojo. He's referring to it as like it's some fighting art.
Ну-ка сюда. Руки, ну, ты ступал. Я тебе...
Это, сударь,
Now he talks about how awesome a stick is as a fighting weapon.
мое универсальное изобретение человечества. Это не только изящная штучка, но и великолепное оружие. Вот, даже против таких долболомов, как он. Или, может, кто-то сомневается?
Сдохнешь, старик.
Есть! Ша! Только после вас.
Ты что, сука?
Не сука, сударь, варежки не разбивай! Я маленький, зато с этой штучкой я великий! Нападай, я разрешаю! Кто желает? Нападение, брат, сестра, защита! Ну, стой, молодой, здоровый, хорошо? Ты молодец, на! Ну!
Yeah, this movie. All right, so they're trying to enforce Russian national identity through the image of Pushkin, and eventually they're disbanded and they create this Mayakovsky group at the end. It's really hilarious. That same guy who played the head of the Pushkinists, he was in this other famous Russian film this time called Happy Days, where this guy whose name is never given in the film loses his memory and he wanders the streets of St. Petersburg trying to find his identity. And lots of these scenes, it's all in black and white. He sits there like in the cemetery just in silence, and you're like, man, this is really depressing. So this search for identity is what that film is all about. This is one of the big things you see in lots of these films. Another big one that follows that is this film Luna Park, which received quite a bit of press at like French film festivals and stuff. Luna Park is about this young man who doesn't know that he's part Jewish, and he's part of that meathead movement that tried to bring about Soviet glory through weightlifting and forcing out Western culture. And then he learns that he's actually part Jewish, and that's one of the things they were trying to eliminate. Was they were trying to ethnically cleanse Russia. So they're essentially like a white supremacist movement partially. Some of those people at least. And so he's a member of this, and then his whole coming to terms with his identity, this identity theme again, is realizing that he's not purely Russian, that he's a mixture of things. And what does that actually mean? So in the trailer here, for example, at the start of this film, so this group of guys, they call themselves the Cleaners. And the Cleaners, they live near this, there's this theme park called Luna Park in here. And then one of the scenes at the start, they take on this biker gang that's supposed to represent, Western culture. And in one of the opening moments here, they're going to say, down with it, destroy Coca-Cola before they start this riot. Let's see some of this here. Who are we, he says? The Cleaners. What are we cleaning up? Russia! Down with Coca-Cola as symbol of America, right? Smashing it, and then they get involved in this big riot here. A very interesting film. It's kind of like, if you've seen Mad Max, like think about that in the Russian context, except reality, and this is what you get. Interesting film. The big one, though, for Russia that really gets attention back into the Russian film industry internationally is Burnt by the Sun, which technically the translation of the title should be more like Wearied by the Sun. 1994, it's just coming to terms with Stalinist era and what does that mean for Russian identity. Won an Academy Award. So it's about this member of the Soviet military who's very respected, and then he gets purged, and like what happens to his family and the reactions that the people around him have to his purging. Another big one, Prisoner of the Caucasus, that deals with the Chechen War. Again, Caucasian War. This stuff with Chechen goes back a long ways, but let me move ahead here. Whoops. Run out of time. There's an old tradition of this stuff I can't get into here, but you're learning about your book. Various films about this. The big one, though, for Russia, you're going to watch this one for next week, is Brother. I'll save explanation of Brother for next week. The actor who played the brother, Sergei Bodrov, was like the big Russian actor for this era, even though he tragically dies in 2002 while filming another movie. Brother and Brother 2 were really big films internationally for Russia, and they're indie films, very low budget. I'll talk more about that on next Monday, because we're going to watch that one. Ukraine. So there's some interesting things about identity in the Ukraine too. This is one of them here. I go through me, but one of the big ones is Famine 33, which is about Holodomor in the 30s. Okay, and then the final one I got to mention real quick, because this is the other one you're going to watch, is Underground, one of the most famous Yugoslavian films, or films from former Yugoslavia ever released. And I don't want to reveal too much about this, but this film essentially it's about Yugoslavian identity during the time of the Yugoslav wars and prior to that. So both of these films, Brother and Underground, serve as a great representation of the searching for identity that you saw through lots of these films in Eastern Europe, especially Russia. But in the Yugoslavia, this was the most famous film that came out of that region in this decade was Underground. It was highly praised in various festivals throughout the world, and it was released in a bit. It's a comedy too. It's like a dark comedy. So we're gonna watch that and Brother for next Monday. I won't show you the trailer because you're gonna watch it anyway, and we're out of time. So if you have any other questions here, hold on a second here. Any questions? Please let me know. Let's see. Do I have a link for the full film? Tim, I'm pretty sure it's actually in your Eastern European Films website access. Go in there and check out Hungary. I'm pretty definite Satan Tango is in there. So if you actually want to watch that beast, and he has other films too, they're good. If you got the guts to do it, I am pretty definite Satan Tango is in there. So just check. Let's see. This movie actually represents my dream last night. Ifrain, which one, Brother? You're talking about? Yeah, you're over Tiger King. You know what, Austin? I'm totally over Tiger King too. I didn't even finish it. I watched the first episode. I was like, I mean, this is vaguely interesting, but it doesn't live up to the hype. Like, it's kind of like, I don't know. Like, if I had to watch it, I probably wouldn't mind, but I don't feel inclined to finish it. Oh, Wings by Nautilus. It's a great song. It's one of the most famous songs in Brother. It's the start and everything. I don't have it. I just know the song. I've listened to it. No Man's Land. Oh, that's that Serbian film, right? Yeah, you can watch that one. Sure, that's a good one. Wait, Efrain. Oh, The Cloud. It's like a car crash. Yeah, it is. Except, forgive me for saying this, but a car crash is probably more interesting than Tiger King. I was like, this is interesting, but I don't feel inclined to finish it. Like, I get it. Like, one episode, I'm like, yeah, all right. He had a tragic life, got involved in tigers. Some people don't like that, and there's conflict. That's it. Okay, I'm done. Now, let's see. If anyone has any other questions, let me know. Yeah, No Man's Land is a good one. I'm familiar with that one. You can watch that one. Yeah, Austin. Yeah, even the first episode was repetitive. I'm like, all right, I get it. And I also thought that the Tiger King himself was going to be way more exciting based on what everybody was saying about it. I was like, wow, this guy's going to be totally nuts. And I was like, I don't know, he seems like a typical American to me, honestly. I'd find probably more excitement down the street with my neighbors. Okay, let's see. Oh, last few episodes were underwhelming. Oh, yeah, I don't know. Oh, no, Austin, you wanted some anime. So if anyone else has any other questions, I'm paying attention here, so just go ahead and ask. Austin wants some anime suggestions here. That depends how hardcore you are. If you haven't seen Attack on Titan, I recommend starting there because it's deep enough in the anime that it's not going to seem like typical American media, but not so deep that you're going to be turned off or offended by it entirely. So I would suggest Attack on Titan. Final season's coming out soon, I believe. That's good for a more serious anime. For comedy, One Punch Man. Gotta go with that. For like bigger budget, extravagant, cool movies, anything by Miyazaki, pretty much Spirited Away, if you haven't heard of that one. Start there. Oh, you've seen Bleach. Oh, Naruto. Okay, not bad. Bleach and Naruto. Depends how hardcore you want to get here. I can name some things. You'd be like, wow, the Japanese really pushing some limits here. Start with Attack on Titan if you haven't watched it. Just start there. Come back to me later. Okay, anyone else have any other questions here? Oh, Carol Baskin and her husband. Yeah, I actually read about that. I didn't watch the episode about it. I know that, yeah. I mean, it definitely seems suspicious, doesn't it? I don't know. Well, okay, Austin, you start with Attack on Titan, and then we'll see how hardcore you can get. Man. Attack on Titan isn't that hardcore. It's a great show. It's violent and disturbing, and has lots of like social commentary and stuff like typical good anime does. I will only say that I think it's season 3 where maybe it's season 2 where it lags a little bit, but then the next season after you're like, this is crazy, I love it. First season's great, and you're like, a little bit of a downturn, then Goblin Slayer, there's another one, but be careful of that. That one's pretty brutal. But I always start with Attack on Titan. Okay, anyone else have any other questions about films or anything? So I gotta shut down here and get ready for my Dracula class after this. Doesn't look like anyone's got any questions. Okay, yeah, try that, Austin. All right, I don't see any other questions. Anything, just email me. You know, a little rush today in this one, but that's because of the timing of the strikes at the restart. Okay, I will see everybody next week for our last film analysis day, and then next Wednesday will be our last day of class because I'll giving you the 27th off. So I will see you on Monday. Thanks a lot.